I woke before the sun that Valentine's morning, February 14th, 1887, and the frost had painted every fence rail white, like somebody'd taken a brush to the whole world and said, "Here, start clean." But clean ain't how my morning started. Not anymore. I could hear Papa coughing from inside the house, that deep, rattling cough that had settled into his chest sometime around Christmas and just refused to leave, like a guest who don't know when supper's over. I pulled my coat tighter and tried not to count the months since it started. Countin' wouldn't help. Countin' never does. The colicky mare in our barn needed checkin', so that's where I went. That's where I always went, to the animals, to the work, to the thing I could actually fix. Her name was Penny, old draft horse belonging to the widow Callahan, and she'd been bloated since Tuesday. I pressed my palm against her belly, felt the tension underneath, and honestly, there's a kind of prayer in that. In touching a hurtin' creature and knowin' not hopin', but knowin' you can ease it. That was my world. The Harper homestead on the edge of Prescott, Arizona territory. Comfrey drying in bundles from the barn rafters. Poulticed jars lined up on shelves my grandfather built. The smell of frozen sage and horse sweat. I'd set 2 plates on the table that morning out of habit, Papa's and mine, then stood there staring at 'em for a long moment before putting one back. Papa hadn't made it to the table for breakfast in 3 weeks. But my hands kept setting that second plate like a ghost was joining me. Folks in town knew me. Course they did. When their horses went lame or their cattle birthed wrong, they'd ride out and say, "Fetch the Harper girl." Not fetch the doctor, not fetch Miss Ada. The Harper girl. Like I was an extension of my father's hands and not a whole person standing there with my own 2. I was 26 years old, unmarried, capable, and I wore that capability like armor, polished it every morning, buckled it tight, because in Yavapai County, a woman who could do what I did was useful. But useful ain't the same as respected, and respected ain't the same as seen. I was checking Penny's gums when I heard it. A horse, screaming somewhere up in the high country. Not pain, exactly, but panic. The kind of sound that tears through cold air like fabric ripping. Most folks would have heard noise. I heard a story. A big horse, running hard, favoring one leg but too scared to stop. The echo told me direction northeast, toward the creek bottoms where the rock walls bounced sound like a church bell. I didn't wake Papa. Didn't think twice about it. Just saddled my mare. Bess good, steady, sensible Bess, and rode toward the screamin'. I should tell you, I reckon, that I wasn't brave. That ain't what it was. It was just when an animal hurts. My body moves before my mind gets a vote. Always been that way. Since I was 6 years old and set a bird's broken wing with a twig and a strip of my petticoat while Papa watched from the porch. Shaking his head and smiling, I tracked by ear, hoofbeat rhythm against rock, breathing patterns carried on wind. The way distress echoes different off limestone than sandstone. You learn that if you listen long enough, if you let the territory talk to you instead of always talking over it. Found him in a creek-bottom big black thoroughbred, 16 hands easy, trembling like a child lost at a fair. Beautiful animal, expensive animal, and terrified. I dismounted slow, spoke low. "Easy now. Easy. Boy. I know you're scared, but you're done running." Stone bruise on his left fore. I could feel the heat through my fingers when I lifted the hoof. Poulticed it right there with comfrey from my saddlebag. I always carried some. The way some women carry handkerchiefs. wrapped it firm but gentle. He let me. Animals always let me. I stood there holding his lead rope in the silence. The frost melting slow around us, the creek running quiet underneath thin ice. Complete in that moment, and completely alone. Funny how those two things lived so close together in me back then. I heard his horse before I seen him, the crunch of hooves on frozen ground. Coming steady from the south ridge. I stepped closer to the thoroughbred protective. I suppose, though I couldn't have said who I was protecting, and waited. He came around the rock outcrop on a brown gelding good horse. Not great. Second best horse. I'd bet my last dollar. The saddle told me money before his face told me anything. Hand-tooled leather. Silver conchos catching the morning light. His coat was wool. Well cut. His hands... well, his hands were clean. And in cattle country, clean hands tell you a man pays others to do his hard work. I categorized him right there. Rich. Careless. The kind who buys quality but don't maintain it. I'd seen 100 like him men who treated horses like furniture. Buy the best. Neglect the upkeep. Act surprised when things fall apart. He stopped dead when he saw me. I mean, just froze. Mouth open, reins slack, staring at me like I'd materialized from the creek mist. Which, honestly, I probably looked like I had. Mud on my skirt. Hay still in my braid from the barn. Holding the lead rope of his prized thoroughbred calm as Sunday morning. Stone bruise on his left fore. Mr. Hartwell. I said. I knew who he was. Everybody in Prescott knew Luke Hartwell. Owned the biggest spread in the county. I poulticed it with comfrey. He'll be sound in a week. He just blinked. How in blazes did you catch him? I've been tracking for hours and couldn't even... You were tracking with your eyes, sir. I kept my voice level, professional. The way I'd learned to speak to men who owned things clear enough they couldn't misunderstand. Calm enough they couldn't call you sharp. I tracked with my ears. Horses talk if you listen. And then he laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not a rich man's courtesy laugh. A real, honest, surprised out of himself laugh that dropped his shoulders 3 inches and changed his whole face. Like a fence gate swinging open that had been rusted shut for years. I noticed that laugh. Noticed it the way you notice a crack in winter ice, where water's moving underneath something alive beneath something frozen. He hadn't laughed like that in a while. I didn't know that yet, not factually, but my gut knew. The same gut that tracked horses by sound knew that this man's joy had been stone bruised too. Can I buy you supper? He said, still grinning. Call it a Valentine's thank you. I'll take supper, I said. And then, and I don't know why I added this, except that I do, but you'd best fix those fences, Mr. Hartwell. A horse like this deserves a corral that holds. He nodded, took Thunder's lead rope from my hand, and our fingers touched for exactly 1 second. Cold skin against cold skin. Nothing. It was nothing. I rode home taking apart that laugh like a watch mechanic taking apart a timepiece. Every gear, every spring, annoyed at myself for caring, annoyed at that laugh for landing somewhere I thought I'd fenced off. The flutter in my chest was cold air. That's what I told myself. Never was much good at lying to myself. His ranch was... well... it was too much. That's the only honest way to say it. I rode through the gate that Valentine's evening, and the scale of the Hartwell operation hit me like a wall of wind. 3 barns, bunkhouse for 12 hands. The main house sat on a rise overlooking the valley 2 stories, wide porch, windows that caught the setting sun and threw it back like gold coins. Beautiful. And, empty feeling. the way a church is beautiful on a Tuesday when nobody's praying. Hired hands nodded as I passed. Polite but quick, the kind of nod that says, "We see you, but we ain't gonna make conversation." The whole place had that energy. Efficient, quiet, lonely in a way that money can't fix, and sometimes makes worse. Luke met me on the porch. He'd cleaned up fresh shirt, hair combed, boots brushed. But his hands? I looked at his hands and stopped. Blisters. New ones, on his palms and between his fingers. He'd been working fences that afternoon. Already, my fingers twitched toward a healer's reflex, same as reaching for a lame horse, and I caught myself halfway. Folded my hands together like I was praying instead of aching to tend something. "You started," I said. He looked down at his hands like he'd forgotten. "You said fix 'em. Seemed like good advice." We ate inside. Simple food, roast beef, biscuits, coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe, which surprised me. I'd expected something fancier, something that matched the silver conchos. But Luke Hartwell ate like a man who'd cooked for himself plenty and wasn't ashamed of it. He asked about my work. And here's the thing that undid me a little. Though I wouldn't have admitted it then, he asked specific questions. Not, "So you help your daddy with the horses?" Not, "Must be nice having a father who teaches you things." He asked about comfrey poulticed ratios. About how I knew the difference between a stone bruise and a fractured coffin bone by touch alone. About whether cold water soaking was better than warm for reducing inflammation in the pastern. Specific questions. Like he actually wanted to know. I answered with precision. Not warmth, I wasn't ready for warmth, but the kind of detail I'd normally only share with Papa. He listened without interrupting. Didn't redirect toward himself. Didn't explain my own knowledge back to me the way men sometimes do. Like they're doing you a favor by confirming what you already said. Somewhere in the second cup of coffee, he told me about the foreman leaving. "Things slid after that," he said, looking at his hands again. "Fences, barn maintenance. I kept meaning to get to it, and then, well, meaning to do something ain't the same as doing it, is it? No self-pity, just honesty laid on the table next to the biscuits." I found myself refilling his coffee without thinking, just reached for the pot and poured. Natural as breathing. Noticed what I'd done only when I set the pot back down. That ain't professional. Ada? That's comfortable. And comfortable was not the plan. "I'll come check Thunder in 3 days, I said. Standing to leave. Professional arrangement. Keep him in a clean stall. Soft bedding. No turnout till I say. Yes, ma'am. And Mr. Hartwell. Luke." I paused. "Luke, fix the rest of those fences." He smiled. Not the big laugh from the morning, but something quieter. Something that stayed. I rode home in cold moonlight, repeating the word professional in my head like a fence post I was driving into soft ground. But I'd noticed 2 coffee cups already waiting on his porch rail when I arrived. Set out before I got there. Like he'd known I'd come and wanted me to feel expected. I wished I hadn't noticed that. 3 days became a week. A week became a habit. I told myself it was about Thunder. And it was partly. That thoroughbred was healing beautifully. The bruise resolving just the way I'd predicted. The new hoof growth coming in clean and strong. I'd check him every visit, run my hands down that left fore. Feel the heat fading a little more each time. Good medicine. Honest work. But, the visits got longer. That's the truth of it. I started noticing things. Luke rebuilt those fences himself, not hiring it out like I'd expected. His first attempts were crooked. Honestly, posts tilted, wire tension uneven, the kind of work that makes a person who knows fences wince a little. But he kept at it. Every visit, I'd see progress. Blistered hands getting calloused. Posts getting straighter. The man was learning. And he was learning the hard way, which is well. That's the only way that sticks, ain't it? He asked questions, not just about fences. About weather, I taught him to read clouds the way Papa taught me. Mare's tails mean wind in 2 days. A ring around the moon means moisture coming. He listened the way he listened about everything with his whole self, not just his ears. I taught him which creek crossings hold in spring melt and which ones turn traitor overnight. Which grasses mean good drainage and which mean you'll lose a wagon wheel to mud. My father's knowledge, flowing through me to someone who actually wanted it. No, that ain't quite right. Someone who valued the woman carrying it. Not just the knowledge itself. There's a difference. Took me a long time to understand that difference. Word had reached us that the Morrison Ranch lost 2 head of cattle to some kind of fever. Distant trouble. Nobody thought much of it yet. The coffee cup was always there. Always, too. Waiting on the porch rail before I arrived. He never mentioned it. Never said, I set this out for you. Just 2 cups. Steaming. Like breathing. I wrapped my hands around that cup one late February afternoon. The thaw had started. Icicles dripping off the barn eaves in a rhythm like a slow heartbeat. And I realized I'd stopped checking for the exit. Every other place I went, the mercantile, the feed store, the ranches where I worked, I always knew the fastest way out. Habit of a woman who's been cornered by opinions often enough to need an escape route. But here, on this porch, I'd leaned back in the chair, settled in, like I belonged somewhere other than beside a sick animal. Lord, that frightened me something awful. Papa noticed. Of course. He mentioned one evening casual as you please, stirring his soup with hands that trembled now. The spoon clinking against the bowl in a rhythm he couldn't steady that Luke had asked about me at the general store. Seemed real interested in how you learned to track by sound, Papa said. Not looking up. He's got a horse with a stone bruise, I said. That's all? That's all, Papa. He smiled into his coffee. I hated that smile. Hated it because it was right. Riding home that night from Luke's ranch. I caught myself humming. Couldn't remember the last time I'd done that. Couldn't remember the tune. Didn't matter. The ice was melting, and I wasn't sure I could freeze it back. The mare's name was Clover. Bay mare. Belonged to the Jensen family up the North Road. First foal, breech presentation. I worked alone through the night. Papa tried to come to the barn, but the coffin took him at the door. I watched him grip the frame, and I really saw how thin his wrists had gotten, how his fingers couldn't close all the way around the wood. That afternoon, I'd found his instrument bag open on the table, the clasps bent where he'd struggled with them. I'd straightened them quietly, cleaned the tools, put everything back without a word. I've got this, I told him. And I did. I always did. 12 hours. That's how long it took. 12 hours of blood and effort and talking to that mare in a voice so low and steady it didn't even sound like mine. I turned that foal with my own hands and listened. I need you to understand what that means. You're reaching inside a 1,000-pound animal who's terrified, and you're asking her to trust you with the most important thing she'll ever do, and she did. She trusted me. The foal came just before dawn, alive, breathing, wobbly and wet and perfect. Clover didn't make it. Sometimes that's how it goes. You save one, and lose the other. The math of healin' ain't always kind. I knew that. I'd known it since I was 12 and watched Papa lose a stallion to colic despite doing everything right. Some fights you win with your hands, he'd said that night. Some fights God wins with his. But knowin' don't stop the hurtin'. Not really. Luke found me sittin' in the hay at dawn. I don't know how he knew to come. Maybe he'd seen my lantern burnin' all night from the ridge. Maybe one of the hands mentioned it. I never asked. He just appeared in the barn door, morning light behind him, and stopped. I was a mess. Blood on my sleeves up to the elbows. Hay in my hair. Hands shaking. Not from cold, from the weight of being the only one who could have saved that foal, the only one who couldn't save the mare, the only one sitting in the aftermath with nobody to tell her she'd done enough. He sat down beside me. Not close, just near. And he didn't say a word, didn't offer solutions, didn't tell me it wasn't my fault, which I already knew but didn't want to hear. He just sat in the hay and breathed and let the silence hold whatever needed holding. I don't know why I said it. Maybe because I was too exhausted to guard the door. Maybe because the morning light made everything honest. I'm scared, Luke, I whispered. Papa's getting worse, and when he can't work anymore, I'll be the horse doctor, not the daughter. And this territory don't... I stopped, swallowed hard. They don't hand that title to a woman alone, not without putting a question mark after it. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, and his voice was so careful, so steady, like he was handling something fragile. I've watched you with Thunder, Ada, and I watched you save that foal tonight. Anybody who can't see what you are isn't worth your worry. I wanted to dismiss it, wanted to fold it up and put it in the drawer where I kept things too soft to survive in daylight. I couldn't. The foal nuzzled my hand. Wet nose, warm breath, new life after loss. Luke offered his hand to help me stand, and I took it. First time I'd accepted help that wasn't about horses. We both just survived something. The foal in me, maybe that was enough for one morning. Prescott started talking in April. Course it did. Small towns got two industries, gossip and judgment, and both were booming. I heard it first at the Mercantile. Mrs. Patterson, who sold ribbon and opinions in equal measure, said to Mrs. Doyle, not quite quiet enough, "Well, the Harper girl's certainly taken an interest in the Hartwell ranch. I suppose a girl's got to look after her prospects when doctoring horses don't pay for a wedding dress." The words hit like a slap in cold air. Not because they were cruelty I could handle, but because they took everything every hour I'd spent learning to heal, every animal I'd saved. Every night I'd worked alone in the dark and reduced it to strategy. Like my hands were just tools for catching a husband. Like my knowledge was bait on a hook. I walked out of that Mercantile with my chin up and my chest burning, and I pulled back. From Luke, from the ranch, from the 2 coffee cups I'd started needing more than I wanted to admit. I canceled a visit to check Thunder he was healed anyway. I told myself, sound on all 4, professional obligation fulfilled, done. I told myself it was pride, but honestly, it was shame. Not mine, theirs. Their shame, pressed onto me like a brand. And the worst part was how easily it stuck. Because deep down, in the place I never let anyone see, I'd been asking myself the same ugly question, did Luke see me? Or did he see a useful woman who happened to be convenient? Then the cattle fever worsened. What had started as whispers about the Morrison Ranch losing a few head had spread like fire in dry grass. The Peterson place lost 8 cattle in a week. Then the Doyle herd started showing signs refusing feed, running hot, dying slow. The university-trained veterinarian from Tucson came, looked important, prescribed treatments that didn't work, and left. Papa knew what it was. Papa knew the remedies: herbal quarantine, creek water treatments, comfrey, and willow bark protocols passed down from old ranchers who learned from the land, not from books. But Papa couldn't ride anymore. Couldn't hardly walk to the barn without leaning on the doorframe. The valley needed what I knew. But asking the woman they'd just been whispering about, well, that was a different kind of fever entirely. I was in our barn, angry and conflicted and brushing Bess so hard she gave me a look when I found the note. Tucked into the barn door latch, folded once, Luke's handwriting. 6 words. Thunder misses his doctor. Fences are holding. I read it 3 times, folded it into my coat pocket, pressed my hand over it like it was a poultice against a bruise I couldn't see. 6 words. No pressure, no rescue, just a door left open by a man who understood that some things you can't push. I kept that note. I still have it, if I'm being honest. Late April. Storm rolled in from the northwest like something with teeth. I sat in Papa's house listening to the shutters rattle and wondering when my life had gotten so tangled. Used to be simple wake up, work, heal what's hurtin', sleep, repeat, clean as fence wire stretched tight. Now everything was looser, messier, full of questions I didn't want answered. Papa was sleeping badly in the next room. That cough, Lord. That cough. Getting worse. And we both knew it. And neither of us said so. That's how the Harpers handled hard truth. We let it sit in the room like furniture and walked around it. I sat by the window and braided my hair. Unbraided it. Braided it again. My hands needed something to do while my mind tore itself apart. I replayed every moment with Luke Hartwell, every coffee cup, every question he'd asked, every time he'd laughed or gone quiet or looked at me like I was the answer to something he'd stopped asking. I searched for the lie, the angle, the performance, the moment where his kindness would curdle into expectation the way men's kindness so often does. Found nothing. And that terrified me more than all of Mrs. Patterson's whispers combined, because I could defend against dishonesty. I'd built my whole life on defending against dishonesty. But what do you do when someone's just genuine? Where do you put that when you ain't got a shelf built for it? The cattle fever had taken 3 ranches now, herds dying. I had the knowledge Papa's protocols, the herbal quarantines, remedies that worked when modern medicine shrugged and left. I could ride out. Help. Save what needed saving. But helping meant being visible. It meant being the woman who does men's work, in front of every tongue that wagged at the mercantile. It meant standing in broad daylight and saying, I am the horse doctor, not the daughter, not the girl. Me. I picked up the lantern by the door. Put it down. Picked it up again. My coffee sat cold on the table I'd poured it an hour ago. Forgotten it completely. And that single stupid detail told me everything about the state of my mind. My hands were arguing with my fear, and my fear was winning. Then I heard it. From our own barn, a wet, rattling cough. Not Papa's. And animals. That same sick sound I'd been hearing about from ranch to ranch all month. The fever had reached our doorstep. I stood there with the lantern in my hand and understood something simple and terrible I could hide from the gossip. I could hide from Luke. I could hide from every feeling that scared me. But I could not hide from what I knew. A woman who tracks by sound can't pretend she don't hear. I lit the lantern. This time, I didn't put it down. Come first light, I was in the saddle, not toward Luke's ranch. I want you to understand that. Not toward him, toward the valley, toward every sick herd and every scared rancher and every acre of land that was dying because the people who owned it were too proud to listen to a woman. I carried Papa's herbal protocols in my saddlebag. Comfrey, willow bark, dried yarrow, creek clay for poulticed bases. I carried 26 years of knowledge that no university granted, and no diploma certified, and no man had permission to take from me. Morrison Ranch first. Old Mr. Morrison, 70 years old. Ranched this valley since before the war, stood on his porch with his arms folded and looked at me the way men look at rain when they ordered sunshine. I sent for your daddy, girl. My daddy sent me, sir, I said, and I didn't flinch. You want your cattle alive, or you want to stand on ceremony? 'Cause I don't reckon your herd cares which one of us holds the poultice. He stared at me. I could see the argument forming behind his eyes, the part of him that said, a woman ain't got no business telling a man how to run his stock. I watched that argument rise, and I watched it break against the simple fact that 6 of his cattle were dying in the south pasture, and the man from Tucson had already failed. Pride is expensive. Dead cattle are more expensive. He stepped aside. I worked that ranch for 2 hours. Showed his hands how to separate the sick ones, how to mix creek water treatments right there in the yard, how to apply willow bark poultice to swollen joints. 3 men twice my age watched me, and slowly, grudgingly, with the kind of respect that gets dragged out of people by competence they can't deny they listened. The Peterson and Doyle ranches came next. Yes, that Doyle, Mrs. Doyle's husband, the woman who'd speculated about my prospects at the Mercantile. He didn't meet my eyes at first. I didn't need him to. I needed him to hold that heifer steady while I worked, and he did. This was my choice. I need you to hear that. Not choosing Luke, I could have chosen Luke any day. That was the easy part. This was choosing myself. Choosing to be the horse doctor in front of God and Prescott and every wagon tongue in the territory. Claiming my own authority not because someone gave me permission, but because the animals were dying, and I was the one who could stop it. Luke rode up around midday. He didn't ride in like a rescue. Didn't announce himself or take charge or do any of the things I'd braced for. He dismounted, rolled up his sleeves, and said, "Where do you need me? Where do you need me? Not where should I go or what do you think or let me handle this." "Water from the creek," I said. "Clean buckets. And hold the Morrison bull he's been fighting the treatment." He held my eyes for 1 beat. Then he nodded, not the quick, "Yes, ma'am," from Valentine's supper, but something slower. Something that carried weight. Like the same 2 words meant something entirely different now that he'd watched me work for months. He worked beside me all afternoon, took my instructions like everyone else, carried water, held animals steady, mixed poultices to my specifications. Not once did he make it about himself. No grand gestures, no looks that said, "See how supportive I am." Just work. Honest. Quiet, side-by-side work. The kind that don't need a name because it speaks for itself. By evening, the outbreak was contained. Every ranch treated, every protocol in place. I stood in the last yard, the Hartwell ranch, where we'd circled back to check his own stock, and I was tired down to my bones. Mud on my skirt, hay in my braid. Same as Valentine's morning. Same woman, but different. Oh, so different. I looked at Luke across the fence rail. Fences Holden. He smiled. That same real smile. Every single one. I nodded. And then I said the bravest thing I'd ever said in my life, braver than riding toward a screaming horse. Braver than facing down old Morrison on his porch. Then come for supper. My turn. I rode home ahead of him, not running away this time, leading the way. Summer came to Prescott the way it always does, slow and golden, like honey pouring off a spoon. The sage turned silver green. The creek ran warm enough to wade, and the fences, well, the fences held. Papa retired in June, just set down his bag one morning and said, "It's yours now, Ada. Been yours for a while, if we're being honest." I cried. He pretended not to notice. That's how the Harpers say I love you. We look the other direction, while the other one falls apart. Then we pour more coffee, and the territory accepted it. Not because I begged or campaigned, but because truth has a way of outlasting gossip. Like good fence posts outlast bad weather. You just gotta stand there long enough. Mrs. Patterson still sold ribbon at the Mercantile, still had opinions, but the opinions had shifted the way wind shifts when seasons turn. That Harper woman saved Morrison's entire herd, I heard her tell a customer one afternoon. With herbs, if you can believe it. She said it with something that wasn't quite admiration, but was close enough. I'd take close enough. Luke's ranch ran clean and strong, fences mended, everyone, horses sound. The operation reflecting a kind of care that hadn't been there before, a care he'd learned from watching, from listening, from asking questions and actually hearing the answers. He was a different rancher than the man who'd lost Thunder on Valentine's morning. Better. The way people get better when they stop performing strength and start actually building it. We shared suppers. His table some nights. Mine others. 2 coffee cups always waiting. He never forgot. I never mentioned it. Some things don't need words, they just need consistency. They need showing up. I'd planted comfrey in my own garden that spring, not just for the medicine bag, but along the fence line, where the purple flowers caught the evening light. Healing things growing right where the boundaries are. Felt right. Somehow. Felt like the kind of truth that don't need explaining. I think about that Valentine's morning sometimes. Riding out before dawn toward a panicked horse. Not knowing that the trail would lead me here. To this porch. This cup. This life that I didn't plan and couldn't have predicted and wouldn't trade for anything the territory could offer. The broken fence was never really about Luke's corral. I see that now. It was about the wall I'd built between my competence and my heart. Like they couldn't coexist. Like being strong meant being sealed. Like letting someone in would weaken the posts I'd spent 26 years setting. But that ain't how fences work. The good ones, the ones that hold through winter storms and spring floods and years of wind, they ain't rigid. They've got give in 'em. Flex. They're built tight enough to keep what matters safe. But they've got gates. Gates that open. Gates you choose to unlatch when the right person's standing on the other side. Patient and kind and willing to wait till you're ready. Luke didn't teach me that. He just stood there on the other side of my fence with blistered hands and honest questions and 2 coffee cups on a porch rail. And he waited. And I opened the gate. My choice. Always my choice. I'm standing at the fence line right now, matter of fact. Sunsets painting everything gold, the pasture, the hills, the mended rails that Luke rebuilt post by post through the spring. Thunder's grazing out there, sound and beautiful, his coat shining like black water in the light. Hard to believe he's the same horse that bolted through a broken corral in February, scared and bruised and running from nothing. I hear Luke coming from the barn, his boots on packed dirt. That steady walk. I don't move toward him. Not from fear, not anymore. From something better. From the quiet certainty that a woman who knows her worth don't need to chase nothing. What's meant to hold will hold. The fences taught me that. I learned that the strongest fences aren't the ones that keep things out. They're the ones built well enough to let the right things in. And mine, Lord willin', mine are holding just fine.